has less to do with the neurotransmitter involved, but the function of the actual receptor. So I don't know if you remember, but excitatory pathways have receptors that lead to depolarization events. Inhibitory pathways have receptors that lead to hyperpolarization events. So as long as you keep those things and go back to, okay, you know, so, you know, just review the action potentials, depolarization and hyperpolarization. And the whole issue here is, if you lead to a depolarization event, you get 2 or 3 signals come in, you're going to have an action potential happen. If you have signals coming in leading to a hyperpolarization event, it's going to take a lot of signaling to come in to do anything. So we have inhibition. Pars reticulata of substantia nigra receives signals from the striatum and has outputs to thalamic nuclei. So now we have signals going from substantia nigra to the striatum, signals coming back from the striatum to the substantia nigra. That's going to go on to the thalamus. This is a critical set of movement pathways. This is what allows you to make smooth movements. The smooth movement I always tell you about is taking your arm and doing this, okay? Versus this trembly movement. With that trembly movement, you've lost all of the inhibitory dopaminergic pathways. Because the reality is this jerky motion, this spastic motion, is a series of full discrete movements, whereas this requires degree of movement in a whole series of events, versus spasms or spastic movement is a whole series of actions that take you to completion. Yeah. So you've got the red nucleus, the inferior and superior colliculi. So you go back in here and you go, well, okay, I see. Sure, this is not pointing for me. I can see the superior colliculus here. Here's the red nucleus, all right. Here we have substantia nigra. Remember, what you can draw a line down the middle here, and they're mirror images. Okay. So now, if we move a little bit inferior to this, so here we are, we're headed inferiorly. What we now have, we still have the para-aqueductal gray matter, which is pretty obvious in the center there, because it's actually gray on this, okay? We have the cerebral aqueduct. We now have the inferior colliculi. You know, you can't really see them here. The anterolateral system is now along the the lateral surfaces here and there. And then through the center here, we have the tectospinal tract. Now, you remember the tectospinal tract? We talked about it. This is the tectum. This is where the tectospinal tract was headed. This is where it was coming to. And the rubrospinal tract. Oh, sure, the yeah.
Can you just point out where the tectospinal is?
All right, right? It's right in here.
Is it like a circle?
Yeah, no, the circle up here is the longitudinal fasciculus. This here, it's hard to visualize.
Kind of grayish.
So it's this. Yeah, really, in the textbook, it's a little more obvious. All right, and then we have the rubrospinal tract. That's actually sitting down here. The point here is, don't think you have to know a little streak in here. You should be able to look at something like this and say, well, you know, it's right about here. That's the important part. Because the rubrospinal, tectospinal, anterolateral systems are all part of the those long tracks that are going to tie together functionality in your brain with somatosensation and with motor. Motor tracks are obnoxious. They're all really long. Okay? So, as you look at this figure, once again, draw it out. Now, in here, start with, well, I've got up here, okay, up here, I've got the inferior colliculi. I've got the paraqueductal gray, the aqueduct, sitting just below the paraqueductal gray here. I've got the tectospinal tract. Sitting out here, I've got the anterolateral. Sitting over here, I've got the rubrospinal tract. So limit yourself to those to start with. Sure, we could draw the Rafe in, but I don't. We're going to get to the Rafe nuclei soon enough. So on this section, I would like you to know these 4 items to get started. Let's keep going inferiorly. Now this something is, see, you came to my office, you gave it to me. I'm going to hold this against you. So, pontocerebellar fibers, pontine nuclei. Oh, sure, this is the pons sitting up there, all right? And once again, back here, you can see the cerebral aqueduct. You can see the remnants of the paraqueductal gray matter. The fasciculus here is buried in the gray matter. Locus ceruleus, sitting here, okay? Locus ceruleus, it's a very important nucleus. Noradrenergic projections, cortex and thalamus. So, if you take, and somewhere we have, you know, this figure that takes up pretty much a whole slide. You could take that, draw in the sections, and work with that. It might help you. And a reticular formation. Reticular formation sitting up here. The reticular formation is going to start to dominate in a little while. And it dominates in a very subtle way. The subtle way is that it's not going to be a majority of the tissue, but it's going to be a majority of the function. So now we slide way down. Okay, so here we have the pons. This is mostly the inferior medulla here. The solitary nucleus, nucleus ambiguus, the inferior olive over here. This entire structure, don't try to divide it up. What you could say is, this is the inferior olive. So, but now we are, you can hardly see what actually is going to be. Well, I wish this was a little clearer. The structure back here is the ventricle. We've stripped away the cerebellum, and that's why it gives it that funny shape. So, yeah. All right. So you should take the time look at those three, those, was it three? Yeah, I think it's three figures. Yeah. All right. Now, let's talk about three of the nuclei I've been referring to repeatedly. Nucleus ambiguous. You should be able to locate nucleus ambiguous. Now, you know, I know a lot of times you want to just look at a section and say, well, here it is in this section. I want you to think about these nuclei. I want you to think about, you know, because I think all of these were marked on the section, the medial sections we looked at of the brain, looking at cranial nerves, so that you could say, oh, look at this, they extend for this distance, etc. Motor neurons for the larynx and pharyngeal muscles. Well, that's interesting. Preganglionic parasympathetic neurons for the heart or cranial nerve. Vagus. You know the that should have been like a no-brainer. Vagus should have jumped out. All right? Because parasympathetic is basically the vagus nerve when we're talking about your viscera. Cool. Nucleus ambiguous. Please make sure you take the time to read about it and look at it. Superior olive, or the superior olivary nucleus. Preganglionic sympathetic neurons. Submandibular salivary gland, sublingual salivary gland, lacrimal gland. Oh! Cranial nerve 7. Ten, 7. So far, so good. This is cool. Inferior olive, superior, inferior. Preganglionic, parotid gland, number 9. And finally, nucleus solitarius, afferents from 7, 9, and 10. So, if all of these signals are coming from here, from all of these cranial nerves to nucleus solitarius, what do you think it's doing? You think it's got something to do with integrating signals and taking care of, I don't want to say combining the signals, but integrating signals from 3 cranial nerves for various outputs.
I think it's in textbook, it's like these or something.
I'm sorry?
I think it's talking about gustatory.
Yep. There's a bunch. It's a very complex set of signals that go through there. All right. So let's go down to just above the point of decussation. If we were a little bit lower, we would have decussation happening. So here we have the pyramids, cortical spinal tract running through the pyramids, okay? Here, the central canal. With sitting above it, the gracile nucleus. Here's the fasciculus sitting up there. Here's the nucleus. Here's the fasciculus. Actually, you could call this whole thing the fasciculus. Here's nucleus cuneatus. So fasciculus cuneatus sitting above it. So here's the inferior olive sitting down here. This is it. It's